Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rosefellow Podcast. Along with me today, my partner and co-founder, Sam Tsoumas. Thank you, Sam. You're better. Your back is healing slowly. After
very slowly.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks from back surgery, and already at the office. An animal. And I think that's probably the mindset that we kind of all have here.
Yeah, the MO. The MO of our group.
Absolutely. You know, you had back surgery 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, and by Tuesday you're already calling me and telling me how you're trying to get on a plane to get back to Montreal. The heart, the dedication, there's no one can take that away from you. With that in mind, it kind of brings me to the point of today's podcast. We set out to disrupt the status quo when we started this company 6 years ago. And we gave ourselves, I'd say, a mission that every 5 years we relook at what we're doing to see if how we can improve, how we can make it better. And we kept our word. We did have that sit down in September and said, you know, what can we change? What can we do better? How do we make ourselves better? Not just us, but our team. And I remember you said, you know, let's not only look at Rosefellow, let's look at the real estate industry as a whole and try to dissect every aspect of that business and our business to see how we can improve the experience for a client.
Well, part of it, again, like you said, we tried to make ourselves better at every level. So, we looked at it, we dissected. What are the impediments? What are the trouble spots in making a deal or a transaction happen? You know, we looked at A to Z, and it's important. You know, at the end of the day, you and I always say we could build the best buildings, on budget, on time. If they're not leased, doesn't matter. Leasing is imperative. It brings value to your property. It brings comfort to your investors. So, how do we make it easier for everybody involved? And you and I looked at it. And the first thing that came about was right off the bat, the leases. Something as simple as that. How do we streamline the leases? And on my side of it, it became very evident. We have these leases that are 50, 60 pages.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, without annexes and schedules. And, you and I were talking about this not too long ago. Very recently, we were transacting with a potential tenant. And this is somebody that I knew personally. And, we had a good relationship. And, Rosefellow is known. We're actual deal makers. And because of the size of the lease and the amount of verbiage and, everybody needs to be protected in a triple net lease. Well, those negotiations became strained, and they got sometimes heated. And it dawned on the both of us, well, this is ridiculous. I always say it. You can have a lease that protects you A to Z. If something goes wrong, everybody goes to court. So what is the point of the lease? And if a tenant is happy and the landlord is doing what they need to do, nobody actually looks at a lease. All things go. So, you and I, what was the first thing we did?
How do we chop it? I remember the one comment you made. You said, our lawyers are not going to like us. How do we take a 60-page lease, or I think it was 70, some of them we have. How do we cut it? And your objective was get it down to 20 pages or less. Unheard of. And from the time, I was a broker 20 years ago, that was a standard. There's nothing that's changed. It's archaic, but that's the way it's always been. And you sat down with all the lawyers and you said, guys, find a way.
Yeah, well, it started internally. We have John, sat down with John, the three of us, and we said, okay, what's important, what's not important? First thing evidently is, triple net to lease. That is the at the very core, that's the most important. But everything else, you have damage and destruction, insurance, and you have pages and pages on insurance. And you could always see everybody just shuts off. So we brought that down 20 pages. And we didn't do it 20 pages by reducing the typeset or, playing around with all the annexes. No, we brought this down to 20 pages, and we already started implementing it. You were lucky enough and fortunate enough to have gone through the lease negotiations of the first one. How'd they go?
Amazing. And not only amazing, to the extent that once we did that deal, the client and her broker called us and says, can we use this template for our other transactions that we have in the industry that don't involve Rosefellow? Absolutely. We want to not only better ourselves, better the way things are done. And it's not about being a pioneer. It's just about looking at it and saying, you know what, there's a lot of nonsense that doesn't need to be.
And one of our concerns, as you can imagine, is we have different partnerships and some with their own standard leases. And this was something of a concern where we had to present it to partners that are not involved in, let's say, our personal portfolio. And we presented the lease, and lo and behold, they were also actually quite surprised and happy with it that they've asked us to now incorporate this lease. Again, the idea is to streamline the negotiation so that we get to a point where there are no bad feelings. The lease gets done. It's signed in a relatively short period of time. Again, time is money. You got to move fast.
Absolutely.
And that's just one part of what we looked at.
And that's what was fun about this discussion we had, this brainstorming session. And it wasn't only you and I. It was a lot of people within our company. The next hick that we see in our industry, and this came from our construction division, it was the TI package, or tenant improvement, as we know it, in all of our industrial spaces. So for those that don't know, when you do lease an industrial building, a warehouse, there is a portion of it that is office space. Sometimes it's 5%, sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 15%. And what's a standard in the industry is that a landlord, a developer, will allocate an allowance for that build out of space, because everyone's office space is specific to them. And they'll say, here's, back in the day it was $50 a foot or $100, and today it's up to $200 a foot. What happens, right?
And that's the crux of the problem.
Exactly.
And what's happened is, as these budgets, as construction costs have gone up, they have gone up. Realistic, everybody now stops a transaction waiting for the budget. So when you give an allowance, they need to know what the total cost of the deal is, and that pause, whether it be before signing a lease or even after signing a lease, before it could potentially kill a deal. When you're waiting 2-3 weeks for a budget, plans, and then after you strain a relationship. And we're saying, well, how do we alleviate this? How do we alleviate a tenant's concern where we could get from point A, which is the LOI, to the signing of the lease and not wait for this? Very simple. We just budget properly and we include a turnkey package, whether it's 5% office or 10% office, it's turnkey. So we give our baseline build, which is a standard office build, but it doesn't matter if they have 4 offices or 5. We will build it turnkey. Right away, that alleviated all concerns, ease of transaction, and a happy client.
The words you said, happy client.
Yes.
The last couple of deals we've done where we've spoken about this, you can see their anxiety kind of gone, because there's no more waiting, as you said, from the plans to get the lease signed. In these times, that'd be tariffs, that'd be interest rates, that'd be no matter what's going on in the world. If you have an opportunity to get a deal done, you don't have 4 months. A lot can happen within 4 months. You want to get it done as soon as possible. This expedites the process.
And it also reminds me of one of our earliest transactions. I'll never forget. We actually signed the lease, and the person responsible for it to get the deal done had actually allocated a budget for the build. And at the time, frankly, the budget was correct. But this was just at the onset of COVID. Prices inflated very rapidly. And I remember this was after the lease signed, and the budget ended up nearly double. And I remember the anxiety this person felt. We had very informal discussions where he was like, guys, this could cost me my job. I poorly budgeted the offices, and I've signed a lease. And I remember we actually went back to our partners and said, hey, let's include a turnkey. This is a good covenant. And he was happy, but that can't happen.
The other important factor in having a tenant leave an existing space where he is to moving into one of our, or any new building or any other building, that it be to increase in size, downsize, consolidate, is all those extra costs that don't involve us. Moving costs. You move into a new space, there's new furniture you need to buy, there's new racking you need to buy. There's these initial startup costs in a move that you can't avoid that bog down a deal, where a tenant says, you know what, looks at his broker or his present landlord, says, you know what, let's just renegotiate. Let's stay here. This is not suitable for us, but it's going to cost us too much to move. It's going to cost us too much to rebuild our office space. Let's just deal with it. Let's just stay here for another 10 years. And it is what it is. And that's when we looked and says, well, what can we do? We obviously can't incur their moving costs. We don't know what it is. How do you know what a moving cost is before they even had an estimate? How do we understand what kind of furniture they want? We said, let's control the aspects of a deal that we can control. And what's that? Rent. And you came up with this great idea, and I'll let you talk about it. But
again, moving costs, to your point, are something that everybody has to deal with. And a lot of times existing landlords use that to their advantage, knowing that a tenant will not spend that money because that's capital that's required, and actually renegotiate a lease at rates that are similar to brand new construction for older property. Mike and I, we looked at this and said, well, how do we alleviate this? We've heard moving costs could go $1.50 a foot, $2 a foot. These are big dollars when you're coming, with $0 of a budget. However, for us, we allocate it in our budgets. We look at construction financing versus takeout financing. There is many ways you could actually play with your timing so that we can actually allow a fixturing period, which is known as a free rent period, in order for a tenant to move in and actually set up their operations. That is longer than the norm. The industry norm is 3 months and then 3 months of free rent, 6 months. And we're like, well, why do that? We have the budgets for it. You could mold the budgets with your financing in order to get a 1 year of free net rent, net meaning your baseline rent, so that during that year, the tenant could actually move in, settle themselves in, earn some revenue before the rent. And our requirements with our lenders are very simple. Not only with our lenders, the deal is we need a 10-year deal. These are new constructions. There's financing involved. As long as we have our 10 years, after
a full 10 years,
we're actually okay with it.
Absolutely.
So you almost have an 11-year lease, but the tenant has 1 year to set up, and earn some revenues before they pay any rent. This has never been done in our industry.
What's amazing is this new structure has revived 4 of our deals. 4 deals that we didn't lose to a competitor. 4 deals that died because the client did not want to incur moving costs while paying rent, did not want to incur new furniture costs while paying rent. They were able to come back to the table and say, okay, wow, this changes. Ça change la donne, like they say in French. It changed their perception of their willingness to move. And we're actually at the table with them now. We have 4 LOIs for deals that would have
in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. In a couple of weeks.
Little things.
It's amazing how that thought process changes the way people look at the opportunity to move into a new space.
We looked at this A to Z. So we spoke about clients, we spoke about their needs, the users, the occupants, the rent. Well, there's an important factor here, which is the brokerage community. Commercial brokers are basically 100% of all. Transactions are almost done exclusively by them. The reasoning, you can't have a large worldwide brand that does not have a worldwide broker behind them. This is corporate across the world. And we looked, well, how do we make their lives easier?
Not only that, if we look at what their lives have been or the way they get remunerated, it's been the same way for the last 20 years. Yep. Why has everything evolved in our industry? Construction costs go up, land prices go up. Everything has evolved. The only thing that's still archaic is the way a broker gets paid his commission, that commission structure.
Payment terms, payment amounts. I mean, we looked at this and said, well, why do we have to follow the norm? Our job is to make everybody's lives easier, make a transaction seamless. And the first thing that we did is the payment terms. It used to follow where payment terms were spread out over a course of time that frankly did not make sense with the economics of the world today. And we said, well, why are we doing this? Why does the industry need to do this? We're not obliged by any financial terms, by any parameters imposed by lenders.
In industrial space, the average broker will get paid 50% of its commission upon lease signature and the other 50% upon occupancy.
Now, this was done for everybody's info in a bygone era when occupants, they weren't sure if they would take the keys. So the landlords would be like, well, here, broker, we want to make sure your client takes the keys. When we're talking about, worldwide brands, frankly, from the time the lease is signed, they take the keys. They take possession, as it's known. They take occupancy of their warehouse. So what does a broker's involvement there really implicate? So we said, well, why does this matter? We eliminated that. They've done their job. They brought the client. They consulted their client across the board with every option in the industry. Whether it comes to us or goes to somebody else, it's not the point. We said they've done their job. And when the job is done, they get paid. So we've eliminated this partial payment structure and said, we'll pay it all up front. The little things that make every point of our business easier and funner to transact with. Even our buildings. We'll talk about now how we've made our buildings better. Well, everybody talks about LEED, carbon zero. Should it, shouldn't it? Is it simply a sticker? For us, it's paramount. Going forward, all of our buildings are LEED and carbon zero. Does not matter our partnership. If our partners want to reduce costs and remove it, they won't be our partners.
That is our standard. That is the way we do things. It's important for us. It's important for our own ESG initiative. It's important for the planet. You're absolutely right. We won't take no for an answer. And you know, we've expanded now into the States. We have our first site that we've locked up and that we're in due diligence on. And where we're building, and I think it's most cities, there's not the same requirements that we see. The requirement to build LEED, to build a carbon zero project isn't there. We're making it our objective. And it's incredible the reception from the States saying, well, it's not required. We said, we understand, but it's what we're going to do.
We actually were even looking in an area where they had zero LEED buildings, and they're saying, gentlemen, you really don't have to. We're like, no, this is how Rosefellow operates. And even on our base buildings, you know, specifications used to be the norm for a Class A brand new industrial building was 28 foot clear. It would extend to 32. And even ourselves, when we started, we made our baseline at 32 foot clear. Well, we've changed our baseline. It does not matter whether we build 100,000 feet. We're looking at a project now. We're building at 40 foot clear. And the reason for that is flight to quality, whether it be downsizing. You know, people might be looking for less space. Well, you know, the height does matter. Unless, you know, we have a height restriction, 40 foot clear is our baseline.
Sam, you know, we're living in a time now, it's tariffs. You know, months ago was interest rates. Before that, it was COVID, and before that, it was the Great Recession. We're talking tariffs, and we were thinking of what we can do to not see those costs go through the roof when it comes to our construction.
Some of our partners, even some of our tenants, are, you know, or some people have asked us, well, how are you controlling costs with tariffs? You know, if you're buying your steel from here, and well, first and foremost, you know, I proudly wear the Canadian flag. However, we are growing in the United States, so we have to be mindful of that as well. So one thing that we said is, you know what, where possible, and we don't say where possible because, you know, we're skating in a gray line here. We're actually saying where possible because there's just some things that are not actually made here.
Locally. Yeah.
Locally. However, Rosefellow has also made it as part of their commitment, outside of just building green and LEED and carbon zero, apologies, is to actually use locally sourced materials, locally sourced vendors, suppliers, and contractors. You know, and that is as much to do here in Canada as well as in the U.S. when we are building there. That also helps the tariffs. You know, it helps control our costs, and we live here. We should be supporting products and people that work or are made here.
Absolutely, and you know what? We put it in our construction contracts, and when it doesn't appear, because we have a construction division who overlook the cost analysis with our contractors, and when a product does come from across the board, wherever that border may be, we question them. Why? Why can it not be purchased, in this case, Canada? But same goes for the United States.
Yep.
For the projects we're building in the United States, and we've sat down with the various states and let them know that we're going to use your local people, your local engineers, architects, contractors, and product. Up until the point where you can't. There may be a certain product or element when you build a building that you have to get from overseas or wherever it may be that we have no control over. But we will critique. We're going to analyze that to make sure there's no possible way that it be here in the States and one day in Europe or wherever else we're going to build and wherever else Rosefellow will be. That is our goal and our mission. That's our part.
Well, this is something, you know, whether which side of the fence you sit on, this is where, you know, a lot of the discussion has been, well, why buy abroad? Why buy, you know, we should have people that are doing it locally. Couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
You know? So again, where possible, we will absolutely use going forward in all of our buildings. We've made it a mandate from our construction team to put that in our base building construction contracts where Canadian or Quebec-based labor and materials are used for Quebec projects. And in the U.S., it'd be U.S.-based labor and materials.
And you know what? Before we go, I think there's we can talk about it a little bit. People have called and asked how has business been since we've been hearing about tariffs. What have companies been doing? Obviously, the first week, everybody was on the sidelines. They waited to see what will change, and that happened not for a week, actually, for the first month, and then it got pushed. The tariffs got pushed by a month. You and I have been in probably, I don't even know, dozens of meetings in the last 2 weeks with companies, and it's incredible how smart people have become to say we're not going to wait. We can't wait. We have to keep moving forward. And there was that one client we met on Friday who had a great initiative.
Yeah, they basically told us they deal with their suppliers, and this 25% tariff, basically they cut it halfway. they reduce their cost by half and they reduce their price by half, and it works. The point here is, you hear, well, tariffs and should the industry stop, whether it be, the pandemic that we heard about, the recession that we've lived through. I mean, Montreal, Toronto, any Canadian city, and I'll speak for Canada, these are major metropolitan cities.
We're resilient.
They will not shut down.
It is a hurdle. It's not fun to be living this today. But again, you have to think of a way to move forward, to keep business going. And we can see how these companies have been coming up with solutions and ways to make it happen.
But Mike, in the last, let's say, month, have you stopped going out? Have you stopped eating? Have people stopped shopping? Have people still need products? Do we still, buy online? Yes. Do costs go up? And it's unfortunate? Absolutely. But it is a reality. Our city will not shut down. Business will not stop. Leases will not stop renewing. And it's just something that we have to live with. The only thing that I find it's actually done for us is, as everybody slowed down and people were a little skittish about moving, it's just focused us to be better, when we have a client, when we're dealing with one. If you only have one person, we got to make sure our service is at top of the line. We do not lose that one person, but it's actually made us better.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. A lot of people are going to listen to this, and some are going to critique us and say, "Oh, why are they doing this?" The why is something we've been asked from day one. You always have to try to find a way to be better, and not just for yourself in what you do and everything around you. And we looked at the industry in itself, and there are certain things that just didn't make sense to us. And I hope people are going to look at us and say, they're crazy for this thinking, and others will admire us, but. In business, when you're doing good, people are going to critique you. When you're doing bad, they're going to criticize you. You got to follow your gut, and you got to do what's right, what you believe is right. And we firmly believe in these initiatives. Our team has come together like never before because of the initiatives we take, not only for ourselves, for the industry, but for them too.
The community has, the public officials who have been part of our growth, where we've developed. Have come and bought into this. The brokerage community recently seems to have bought in. Even tenants, with regards to our lease, have bought into this. We've spoken about this and we've been asked, well, aren't you scared of saying this out loud? No, because the truth is, we frankly hope all of our competitors join us and match us. Yeah. It will only better the industry.
Absolutely.
And, it's okay.
What would be a message, Sam, before we go, that you would like to share with our viewers based on what we've been doing in the last couple of weeks on these changes?
Look, it's funny. We've spoken about our slogans. And it was F status quo, and you try to come up with something that really identifies us as a company, and everything that we just spoke about actually matches the slogan that we're going to actually start promoting, which is believe in better.
Absolutely.
And it's
not about being better than anybody.
It's not about being best.
Yes.
It's just being better than you were yesterday.
Exactly.
Believe in better. You got to believe that you can be better. And it's not only as a human being, it's, as a businessman, as a company, we're in industrial real estate. How do we make ourselves better? How do we make our company better? And every little thing that we try to do is that. And I believe that is the message.
Absolutely. And for myself, for those listening, I always say, people are going to hate what you do. People are going to love what you do. Just do what you want to do. Follow your dream. And don't let anybody tell you no. When we spoke with the lawyers initially about this 20-page lease, they said you're crazy, don't do it. And then I went to construction with the office build-outs included. They said don't do it, doesn't make sense. You're gonna go over budget. We found a way, and we didn't take no for an answer. And I think we are once again disrupting the way things are done, and we will keep doing so because, to your point, we just believe we can always do better.
I could say if you don't piss anybody off, you're not probably doing anything right. So. It's okay. Absolutely.
So for those of you that were tuned in today, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Rosefellow Podcast. Thanks, Sam, for once again. You gave me goosebumps when I think about what we're doing now. But I think I'll finish up by saying believe in better because we'll keep doing so. Thank you.